10-year-old Kevin Parker sat alone in the middle of the bleachers at his school sports day. To his left, 50 feet away, sat his mother Linda. To his right, 50 feet away, sat his father Tom. As far apart as they could possibly get while still technically being at the same event. Kevin had won 3 races that morning. He'd scored the winning goal in soccer. He'd gotten a ribbon for long jump. But he wasn't smiling. Because every time he looked left, his mother was clapping alone. Every time he looked right, his father was cheering alone. And Kevin was celebrating alone. In the middle, always in the middle. Then something happened that would change everything. Bruce Lee, who'd been invited to give a martial arts demonstration at Lincoln Elementary School, walked onto the field. But he didn't start his demonstration. Instead, he looked up at the bleachers and he saw what every adult had been ignoring. A child whose heart was breaking. Not from physical injury, from something much worse. What happened next would become the most important lesson on co-parenting after divorce that thousands of families would ever learn. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, you need to understand how Kevin Parker's family had gotten to this breaking point. 2 years earlier, Linda and Tom Parker had what looked like a perfect marriage. Tom was a successful architect. Linda worked in marketing. They had a beautiful house in San Francisco, a great group of friends, and an 8-year-old son who was the center of their world. From the outside, they had everything. But perfect from the outside doesn't always mean whole on the inside. Tom had been working late more and more frequently. Linda had been feeling disconnected, lonely, unseen. They'd stopped talking about anything meaningful. They'd become roommates who happened to share a child. And then Linda found the text messages. Tom had been having an affair with a colleague for 6 months. Not a deep emotional connection. He would later explain desperately. Just something that happened when he felt invisible at home. But to Linda, the reason didn't matter. The betrayal was absolute. The trust was shattered. And within 3 months their marriage was over. The divorce was brutal. Not because of money or property, though those negotiations were painful enough, but because of Kevin. Both Linda and Tom loved their son desperately. Both wanted to be good parents, but they couldn't be in the same room without one of them saying something cutting, something designed to hurt, something that reminded the other person of exactly why their marriage had failed. The lawyers encouraged them to communicate through official channels only. The therapist they tried for exactly 3 sessions told them they needed to put Kevin first. Easy to say, impossible to do when looking at your ex-husband reminded you of every moment of betrayal, every lie, every shattered dream. Impossible to do when looking at your ex-wife reminded you of your own failure, your own weakness, your own unforgivable mistakes. So they developed a system, a terrible system, but the only one they could manage. They would both attend Kevin's important events, but they would stay as far apart as possible. They wouldn't speak to each other unless absolutely necessary. They would communicate about Kevin only through text messages or email. They told themselves this was better than fighting in front of him. They told themselves this was protecting him from conflict. They didn't realize they were doing something much worse. They were teaching Kevin that love was conditional, that families could break so completely that the pieces couldn't even occupy the same space, that he was the reason his parents had to endure each other's presence. Every school event, every birthday party, every soccer game, Kevin felt the weight of being the reason his parents were forced into proximity with someone they clearly couldn't stand. Kevin never said anything about it. He was a good kid, a sensitive kid. He could feel his mother's tension when his father walked into a room. He could see his father's shoulders slump when his mother looked away. So Kevin learned to be small, to be easy, to never ask for anything that might require his parents to actually talk to each other. He stopped asking for both parents at bedtime stories. He stopped hoping they'd both come to his classroom presentations. He stopped fantasizing that maybe, somehow, they'd realize they still loved each other and put the family back together. Instead, he learned to split himself in half. Left Kevin, who was cheerful and uncomplicated for Mom. Right Kevin, who was strong and never showed sadness for Dad. And in the middle, alone, was the real Kevin. the one who just wanted his family back. On this particular Saturday morning, Lincoln Elementary School was hosting its annual sports day. It was a big event. Kids competed in races, played team sports, showed off their athletic abilities. And this year was extra special, because somehow, through a connection one of the teachers had, they'd managed to book Bruce Lee to give a martial arts demonstration. Kevin had been excited about sports day for weeks. He'd been training, practicing, determined to make his parents proud. He'd told his mother about it. He'd told his father about it. Separately, of course, always separately. And both Linda and Tom had promised to be there. They'd both marked it on their calendars. They'd both planned to show up. What they hadn't planned was where they would sit. They never planned that. It was an unspoken understanding that they would arrive separately, find spots as far apart as possible, and endure the event from opposite sides of the venue. Today was no different. Linda arrived early, secured a spot on the left side of the bleachers with a good view of the field. Tom arrived 15 minutes later, saw where Linda was sitting, and immediately walked to the right side, as far away as he could get. And Kevin, who'd been waiting near the entrance hoping that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different, watched his parents split apart like opposite magnets. He watched his mother settle into her spot, pulling out her phone, not looking in his father's direction. He watched his father find his seat, shoulders tense, jaw tight, and Kevin did what he always did. He walked to the middle section of the bleachers and sat down alone. The morning events started. Kevin participated in the 100-meter dash and came in second. He looked left. His mother was clapping, enthusiastic, proud. He looked right. His father was cheering, loud, encouraging. But they weren't looking at each other. They weren't sharing the moment. They were each having a separate experience of their son's achievement. Kevin smiled the smile he'd perfected over 2 years. The smile that said, "I'm fine," when everything inside him was breaking. Next was the relay race. Kevin's team won. He looked left. Mom was taking photos, beaming. He looked right. Dad was pumping his fist, excited. But there was a 50-foot gap between them. An impossible distance that Kevin felt in his soul. He held up his ribbon, wanting to run to someone, but knowing that choosing one parent meant the other would hurt. So he waved to both sides and walked back to his team, the ribbon meaningless in his hand. Then came the soccer match. Kevin scored the winning goal. A perfect kick, upper right corner. The goalkeeper had no chance. The crowd erupted. His teammates surrounded him. And Kevin, in the chaos of celebration, looked up at the bleachers. Left, his mother was standing, clapping wildly. Right, his father was shouting his name. And in that moment of triumph, in what should have been the best moment of his morning, Kevin felt completely and utterly alone. That's when Bruce Lee arrived. He'd been scheduled to give his demonstration at 11 a.m., and it was now 10:50. He walked onto the field to check the space, to see where he'd be performing, to get a feel for the audience. Bruce Lee always did this. He never just showed up and performed. He wanted to understand the energy of a space, the people in it, what they needed from him. He looked around the field, saw kids playing, laughing, competing, saw parents cheering, taking photos, enjoying their children's achievements, normal, happy. Exactly what a school sports day should be. But then his eyes moved to the bleachers, and he saw something that made him stop. In the left section, a woman sitting alone. In the right section, a man sitting alone. And in the middle section, a 10-year-old boy sitting alone, looking left, looking right, his face a mask of practiced happiness covering obvious pain. Bruce Lee had seen many kinds of pain in his life. Physical pain from injuries in training and fighting. Emotional pain from rejection and discrimination. Spiritual pain from seeking and sometimes failing to find meaning. But what he saw in Kevin Parker's face was something that pierced him deeply. The pain of a child, trying to hold together two halves of a broken family with nothing but his small, insufficient love. He watched as Kevin's team finished their soccer celebration, and Kevin walked back to the middle section of bleachers, watched as the boy looked left, gave his mother a thumbs up, looked right, gave his father a thumbs up, then sat down alone, his shoulders just slightly slumped, his victory forgotten. Bruce Lee had seen enough. He walked over to the principal, Miss Henderson, who was coordinating the day's events. "Miss Henderson," Bruce Lee said quietly, "I need you to do something for me, before my demonstration." The principal, starstruck by having Bruce Lee at her school, immediately agreed. "Of course, Mr. Lee, anything you need." Bruce Lee pointed to the bleachers, the woman on the left side. "The man on the right side, can you ask them to come down to the field? Tell them I need to speak with them for a few minutes." Miss Henderson followed his gaze, and recognized Linda and Tom Parker immediately. She knew their situation. Every teacher at the school knew their situation. The divorced parents who couldn't be in the same room, whose son was one of the sweetest, most heartbreaking kids she'd ever taught. "Mr. Lee," she said carefully, "those two they're divorced. They don't really speak to each other. Maybe I should—" "I know," Bruce Lee said gently. "That's why I need to speak with them. It will only take a few minutes. But Miss Henderson, I believe this is more important than my demonstration." The principal studied his face, saw something there that told her not to question this request. She nodded and walked toward the bleachers. Linda Parker was checking her phone, trying not to look at the right side of the bleachers where she knew Tom was sitting, when Miss Henderson approached. "Mrs. Parker, could you come down to the field for a moment? Bruce Lee would like to speak with you before his demonstration." Linda's first thought was worry. Was Kevin okay? Had something happened? But Miss Henderson's expression was calm, so Linda nodded and followed her down. On the right side of the bleachers, Tom Parker was having the same experience. "Mr. Parker, Bruce Lee has requested to speak with you before his demonstration. Would you mind coming down to the field?" Tom was confused but agreed. He assumed it was some kind of parent volunteer thing. Maybe they needed help with equipment. Both Linda and Tom followed Miss Henderson down to the field, neither realizing the other had been summoned until they rounded the corner and came face to face. Linda's expression immediately hardened. Tom's jaw tightened. They both stopped walking, creating maximum distance between them, even though they were supposedly walking to the same destination. Bruce Lee stood waiting near the edge of the field, far enough from the bleachers that their conversation would be relatively private. When he saw them approaching from different directions, both radiating discomfort at being in proximity to each other, he felt a deep sadness. These were two people who had once loved each other enough to create a child together. Now they couldn't even walk side by side for 30 feet. "Thank you for coming," Bruce Lee said as they reached him. Linda and Tom stood awkwardly about 6 feet apart, both looking at Bruce Lee and very deliberately not looking at each other. "I know you're busy and I know this is unexpected," Bruce Lee continued. "But I saw something just now that I cannot ignore. May I speak with you both honestly?" Linda glanced at Tom, then back at Bruce Lee. "Of course, Mr. Lee. We're honored to. I mean, Kevin has been so excited about your demonstration. She trailed off, unsure what this was about. Tom nodded. "Yes, sir. Whatever you need. But I should mention that Linda and He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't want to air their private business to a stranger, even a famous one. "I know you're divorced," Bruce Lee said directly, but without judgment. "I can see it from your seating arrangements. I can see it from the way you avoid looking at each other. But more importantly, I can see it from your son." Linda and Tom both reacted to that, their heads turning sharply to look at Bruce Lee. "What do you mean?" Linda asked, and her voice had an edge of defensiveness. "Kevin's fine. We've made sure, with respect, Mrs. Parker," Bruce Lee interrupted gently. "Kevin is not fine. Your son is sitting alone in the middle section of those bleachers. You," he gestured to Linda, "are sitting on the left. You," he turned to Tom, "are sitting on the right, 50 feet apart, and your son is in the middle, alone, always in the middle." He paused, letting that image sink in. This morning Kevin won races. He scored a goal. He earned ribbons. He had victories. But did you see his face? He wasn't celebrating. He was checking, looking left, looking right, making sure you both saw him, making sure neither of you felt excluded. Tom felt something twist in his chest. He'd noticed Kevin looking back and forth, but had assumed the boy was just excited, wanting to share his victories. Now, hearing Bruce Lee describe it, he realized there was something else happening, something painful. Linda felt her throat tighten. She'd been so focused on avoiding Tom, on maintaining her composure, that she hadn't really seen Kevin's face, hadn't noticed the careful way he divided his attention, his love, his celebration between them. I didn't come here today to give a martial arts demonstration and ignore a child in pain, Bruce Lee said, and his voice carried a weight that made both parents fully present in a way they hadn't been in 2 years. I came here to teach, and right now the most important teaching I can offer is not about fighting, it's about flowing. He looked at both of them. May I share something with you? Something that might help your family? Linda felt tears prick her eyes and nodded, not trusting her voice. Tom swallowed hard and said, please, we're listening. Bruce Lee gestured for them to sit on the grass near the edge of the field, away from the crowd's direct view. Both parents sat, still maintaining distance from each other, and Bruce Lee sat facing them. In martial arts, Bruce Lee began, we talk about water. Be like water. It's something I teach constantly. Water is soft but powerful. It flows around obstacles. It adapts to any container. But here's something people don't often think about. He paused, making sure they were following. Water can split. Rivers can divide. A single river can become 2 separate rivers, flowing in different directions. Linda and Tom both nodded, unsure where this was going but paying attention. You two used to be one river, Bruce Lee continued. You flowed together. You shared the same path. But then something happened, and your river split. He looked at Tom, who flinched slightly. Maybe one river made a wrong turn. Maybe both rivers couldn't stay on the same path. The reason doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that now you're 2 rivers, flowing separately. He let that sit for a moment. Being 2 rivers isn't wrong, Bruce Lee said. Rivers split all the time in nature. It's natural. It's okay. You don't have to be one river anymore. He paused. But here's what you're forgetting. He pointed toward the bleachers where Kevin was still sitting alone. Your son is not a river. Your son is the ocean. Linda felt something break open in her chest. Tom's eyes widened. Bruce Lee continued. 2 rivers can flow separately. That's fine. But if 2 rivers refuse to flow into the ocean, if they turn away from the ocean because they don't want to touch each other even at the edges, he made a gesture with his hands, showing water refusing to meet. Then the ocean doesn't get water, and an ocean without water. He paused, letting them complete the thought. Dies, Linda whispered, and tears were now streaming down her face. Bruce Lee nodded gravely. Your son is dying, not physically, but his spirit, his heart, his sense of family, his understanding of love, these are dying. Every time you sit 50 feet apart, every time you refuse to even look at each other, every time Kevin has to split himself in half, left and right, never whole, you're teaching him that love is conditional. That family can break so completely that the pieces can't exist in the same space. Tom's hands were shaking. He'd thought he was doing the right thing, staying away from Linda, not fighting, not creating conflict. But hearing Bruce Lee describe it this way, he realized they'd been creating a different kind of conflict. A quiet, persistent, soul-crushing conflict that Kevin absorbed every single day. Mr. Lee, Tom said, and his voice cracked. I don't know how to, Linda can't even look at me. I destroyed our marriage. I made a terrible mistake. I don't expect forgiveness. But how do we? Bruce Lee turned to Linda. Mrs. Parker, do you love your son? Linda looked shocked by the question. Of course, more than anything in this world, Bruce Lee nodded. And you believe that Tom, despite his mistakes as a husband, loves Kevin too? Linda wanted to say no, wanted to say that Tom didn't deserve to be called a good father. But she knew it wasn't true. Whatever else Tom was, he loved Kevin desperately. Yes, she admitted quietly, he loves Kevin. Then, Here's what I want you to understand, Bruce Lee said. You don't have to forgive Tom. You don't have to like him. You don't have to be friends. You don't even have to look at him if it causes you pain. But for Kevin's sake, for the ocean's sake, you have to be water, both of you. He looked at both parents. Water doesn't hold grudges. Water doesn't carry resentment. Water doesn't build dams. Water flows, and when two rivers flow into the ocean, they don't have to touch each other. They don't have to merge back into one river. But they both give their water to the ocean. They both flow to the same place, even if they're flowing from different directions. Linda was crying openly now. Tom was blinking back tears. Bruce Lee's voice became softer. Your marriage is over.
I understand that.
Some rivers split and never come back together. That's okay, but your family, your role as Kevin's parents, that's not over. That's forever. He leaned forward. You can be two rivers. You can flow separately in your lives. But when it comes to Kevin, you need to flow toward him, together. Not as one river, but as two rivers giving water to the same ocean. How? Linda asked. And her voice was small, vulnerable. How do we do that? We can barely be in the same room. Bruce Lee smiled gently. You start small, like water starting as a single drop. Today, right now, there's a starting point. He gestured toward the field. In about 10 minutes, I'm going to give a demonstration. Kevin is excited about it. Very excited. He's told you both about it. Yes, both parents nodded. Here's what I want you to do, Bruce Lee said. I want you to sit together. Both Linda and Tom started to protest, but Bruce Lee held up a hand, not merged back into one. Not pretending everything is fine, just close enough that Kevin can look forward and see both parents, not left and right. Just forward. Can you do that? For 10 minutes. For Kevin. Linda looked at Tom for the first time in months, really looked at him. Saw that he looked older, tired, sad. Saw that he was genuinely trying. She thought about Kevin, alone in the middle, always in the middle. She took a shaky breath. Okay, she whispered. I can try. Tom felt something loosen in his chest, not hope for reconciliation. He knew that ship had sailed, but hope for something else. Hope that maybe he and Linda could give Kevin a different kind of family. Not a traditional one, but one where the rivers flowed to the same ocean. I'll do it, Tom said. For Kevin. I'll do whatever it takes. Bruce Lee stood up. Good. That's water. That's flow. It's not perfect. It's not easy. But it's what Kevin needs. He helped both parents stand. Now there's one more thing, he said. In about 5 minutes, Kevin is going to compete in his final race of the day, the 400 meter. It's his favorite distance. He's very good at it. Bruce Lee looked at both parents. When Kevin runs, I want you both to cheer, together, not from 50 feet apart, together. You don't have to hold hands. You don't have to touch. But I want your voices, your support, to reach Kevin from the same direction. So he can run forward, toward his family, instead of constantly looking left and right, checking, worrying, dividing himself. Can you do that? Can you cheer together for your son? Linda and Tom looked at each other. It seemed like such a small thing, just cheering together. But it felt enormous. It felt like crossing an ocean. It felt impossible. And yet, when they thought about Kevin running alone, looking left and right, celebrating victories with only half his heart. Yes, Linda said. I can do that. Tom nodded. Yes, me too. Bruce Lee smiled, and it was a smile of genuine warmth and approval. You're being water. You're starting to flow. This is good. He placed a hand briefly on each of their shoulders. Your marriage ended. That's a fact. But today your family starts healing. Not back to what it was. Into something new. Two rivers flowing to one ocean. Remember that. Two rivers, one ocean. Now he gestured toward the bleachers. Go sit with your son. He's been alone long enough. Linda and Tom walked together, awkwardly toward the bleachers. It wasn't comfortable. They didn't talk. But they walked in the same direction, toward the same destination. And that was something they hadn't done in 2 years. Kevin saw them coming and felt confused. His parents were walking together toward him. What was happening? Mom? Dad? Kevin asked as they reached the middle section, where he was sitting. Is everything okay? Linda sat down on Kevin's left. Tom sat down on Kevin's right. For the first time in 2 years, Kevin was sitting between his parents, not 50 feet from each one, between them, close enough to touch both. Linda reached over and ruffled Kevin's hair. Everything's fine, sweetie. We just realized we were sitting too far away. We wanted to be closer to you. Tom cleared his throat. We're sorry we've been so far apart, Kev. That wasn't fair to you, but we're going to try to do better. Okay. Kevin looked at his mother, then at his father, then straight ahead, barely able to believe what was happening. Okay, he whispered. And for the first time that day, his smile was real, not practiced, not careful, just purely, genuinely happy. The announcement came over the speakers. Final event of the morning, the 400-meter race. All participants to the starting line. Kevin stood up. That's me, he said, still slightly dazed by his parents sitting together. Linda squeezed his hand. Run your best, honey. Tom patted his shoulder. You got this, Kevin. Go show them what you can do. Kevin ran down to the starting line, and for the first time in 2 years, he didn't look back to check on his parents. He looked forward, because he knew somehow that they were both there, together, behind him. The race started. Kevin ran beautifully. He wasn't the fastest kid in the race, but he ran with something he hadn't had before. He ran with joy, with freedom, with a lightness that came from not having to carry the weight of divided loyalty. And when he rounded the final turn, when he was sprinting toward the finish line, he heard something that made his heart soar. His parents' voices, together, cheering for him. Not from the left, not from the right, from Bo and him. United in their support, even if they weren't united in anything else. Go Kevin, Linda shouted. You got this, Kevin, Tom yelled, and their voices mixed and merged in a way that Kevin hadn't heard in so long. He crossed the finish line in 3rd place. Not his best time, but it felt like a victory anyway. Because when he looked up at the bleachers, his parents were sitting together, clapping together, celebrating him together. Bruce Lee, standing at the edge of the field, watched this moment unfold. He saw Kevin's face light up with pure happiness. Saw Linda and Tom, still not looking at each other, but managing to occupy the same space for their son. Saw a family that wasn't healed, but was starting to heal. Wasn't whole, but was finding a new shape. 2 rivers flowing to one ocean. The martial arts demonstration happened shortly after. Bruce Lee performed beautifully, as always. Showed impressive techniques, philosophical insights, the blend of power and grace that made him a legend. But the most important demonstration he'd given that day wasn't the physical one. It was the lesson he'd taught Linda and Tom, that love for a child could be stronger than hate for an ex. That family didn't have to look traditional to be real. That 2 broken pieces could support the same whole. After the demonstration, as people were packing up and preparing to leave, Kevin ran up to Bruce Lee. Mr. Lee, that was so cool. Thank you for coming to our school. Bruce Lee knelt down to Kevin's level. Thank you for letting me be here, Kevin. Did you enjoy your races today? Kevin nodded enthusiastically. I got 3rd place in the 400-meter. It was my best race ever. Not because of the time, Kevin added thoughtfully, but because he trailed off, not quite having words for what had felt different. Because you ran forward instead of looking left and right. Bruce Lee suggested gently. Kevin's eyes widened. Yes, exactly. How did you know? Bruce Lee smiled. Because I saw you before. Looking left and right, splitting yourself in half. He tapped Kevin's chest. But today you ran with your whole heart. That's the best way to run. That's the best way to live. Kevin looked back at the bleachers where his parents were now standing together, still maintaining some distance but together nonetheless. Mr. Lee, he said quietly. Did you do something? Did you talk to my parents? Bruce Lee stood up. But Ed. Your parents love you very much, Kevin. Sometimes adults forget what's important. Sometimes they need reminding. He ruffled Kevin's hair. But what matters is that they remembered. And that's going to make things better. Not perfect, but better. Kevin hugged Bruce Lee spontaneously, fiercely. Thank you, he whispered. Bruce Lee hugged him back. You're welcome. Now go be with your family. You have two parents who love you. Don't waste a single moment of that. Kevin ran back to Linda and Tom, who were awkwardly standing together, not sure what to say to each other but trying. When Kevin reached them, he grabbed both their hands. Can we go get ice cream? He asked, hopefully. All three of us, Linda and Tom, looked at each other. 2 years of hurt, of anger, of resentment. All of that was still there. But also there was Kevin, holding both their hands, looking up at them with hope they hadn't seen in so long. Yes, Linda said, her voice catching. We can do that. Tom nodded. Ice cream sounds great, buddy. Let's go. They walked toward the parking lot together. Not a reunited family. But not a broken one either. Something new. Something healing. 2 rivers flowing toward one ocean. Bruce Lee watched them go and felt a deep sense of rightness. This was what martial arts was really about. Not fighting. Not violence. But finding flow. Finding balance. Being water in a world that wanted everything to be rigid and unchanging. In the weeks and months that followed, Linda and Tom's relationship didn't magically heal. They didn't become friends. They didn't forgive and forget. But they started to flow. They began attending Kevin's events and sitting together. Not merged, not back to how they were, but close enough that Kevin could look forward instead of left and right. Close enough that Kevin could celebrate victories with his whole heart, instead of split in half. They started having brief conversations about Kevin's needs. Not through lawyers, not through terse text messages, actually talking. It was uncomfortable at first, but water that doesn't flow becomes stagnant. So they learned to flow, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. They learned to put Kevin first, not by avoiding each other, but by showing up together. 2 rivers, 1 ocean. Kevin flourished. The quiet, careful child who'd been splitting himself in half started to become whole again. He laughed more. He worried less. He stopped checking constantly to see if his parents were okay, if they were hurting, if he was causing them pain by making them be in the same space. He started just being a kid again. A kid with 2 parents who loved him, who weren't together but were there for him. One day, about 6 months after the sports day, Kevin came home from school with an assignment. His teacher had asked everyone to write about a moment that changed their life. Kevin wrote about the day Bruce Lee taught his parents about 2 rivers and 1 ocean. He wrote about running forward instead of looking left and right. He wrote about how his family wasn't perfect, but it was his family, and it was enough. Linda and Tom both cried when they read Kevin's essay. They cried because they realized how much pain their son had been in, how much he'd been carrying alone, how close they'd come to breaking him with their inability to flow. And they cried because they were grateful, grateful that Bruce Lee had seen what they'd been too hurt and angry to see. Grateful that they'd learned how to be water for their son, even when they couldn't be water for each other. Years later, when Kevin was grown and starting his own family, he would tell the story of the 2 rivers and 1 ocean to anyone who would listen, to friends going through divorce, to colleagues struggling with co-parenting, to anyone who thought that a broken marriage meant a broken family. He would say that Bruce Lee taught his parents the most important lesson of their lives that day. Not about martial arts, about love, about flow, about putting a child's ocean before your own river. And always, when Kevin told this story, he would end it the same way, with Bruce Lee's words. You don't have to be 1 river. You can be 2 rivers, but you both flow to the same ocean. And if you remember that, if you truly remember that, your family never has to be broken, just different, just new, just flowing. If you're watching this and you're going through a divorce, or you're co-parenting with someone you can't stand, or you're making your child choose between two parents who can't occupy the same space, stop, take a breath. Remember what Bruce Lee taught. You don't have to like your ex. You don't have to forgive them. You don't have to be friends. But for your child you have to be water. You have to flow, because your child is the ocean, and an ocean without water dies. Your marriage might be over. That river might be permanently split, but your family, your role as parents, that's forever. And your child deserves to run forward toward both of you. Instead of constantly looking left and right, checking, worrying, splitting themselves in half, trying to love you both without hurting either of you. Be two rivers, but flow to the same ocean. Always flow to the same ocean. If this story touched you, if you recognized yourself in Linda or Tom or Kevin, share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that co-parenting doesn't have to be perfect to be good. That family doesn't have to look traditional to be real. That two broken pieces can support the same whole. Leave a comment about your own co-parenting journey, about the moment you realized you needed to change, about how you learned to flow for your children. Subscribe to hear more stories about how ancient wisdom solves modern problems, about how the greatest teachers show us that real strength isn't about never breaking, but about learning how to flow even when you're broken. And remember, always remember, two rivers, one ocean. Your child is the ocean. Never let them die of thirst because you refuse to flow. Be water, my friend. For your children. Always for your children. Be water. The impact of that single Saturday morning at Lincoln Elementary School rippled far beyond the Parker family. Miss Henderson, the principal who witnessed the entire interaction, started implementing co-parenting support groups at the school. She'd seen too many children like Kevin, caught in the crossfire of adult pain, and she realized schools could be places of healing, not just education. Within a year, Lincoln Elementary had become a model for how schools could support children of divorce. They created Family Day events specifically designed to make co-parenting easier. Separate seating sections were eliminated. Instead, they provided family zones where divorced parents were encouraged to sit together for their children. Some parents couldn't do it, but many, remembering the story of Bruce Lee and the Parker family, tried. The story spread through parent networks, through divorce support groups, through family therapy sessions. Linda Parker, once reluctant to even speak about her divorce, became an unexpected advocate for conscious co-parenting. She started speaking at local parenting groups about her experience that day, about how she'd been so consumed by her own hurt that she'd been blind to Kevin's pain, about how Bruce Lee had helped her see that protecting Kevin from conflict wasn't the same as hiding from conflict herself. Tom Parker, carrying the weight of being the one who'd broken the marriage, found unexpected redemption in learning to be a better co-parent. He couldn't undo his affair. He couldn't erase Linda's pain or rebuild the trust he'd shattered, but he could show up for Kevin. He could sit beside Linda at school events even when it was uncomfortable. He could be water flowing toward his son even when everything in him wanted to run away from the reminder of his failures. The transformation wasn't linear. There were setbacks, times when old resentments flared up, times when Linda couldn't look at Tom without feeling the fresh sting of betrayal, times when Tom's guilt made him retreat into old patterns of avoidance. But they had Bruce Lee's words to guide them back. Two rivers, one ocean. When they felt themselves building dams, they remembered Kevin's face that day, running forward, smiling, real, whole. Kevin's therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, noticed the change in him immediately. For 2 years she'd been seeing a child who was meticulously careful, who measured every word, who seemed to be constantly calculating how to keep both parents happy while maintaining his own emotional survival. After that sports day, something shifted. Kevin started talking about his parents without the careful neutrality he'd always maintained. He said things like, "Mom and Dad came to my recital together," without the undertone of miracle or shock. He began to relax into the reality of his new family structure. Dr. Chen asked Linda and Tom about what had changed. They told her about Bruce Lee, about the two rivers and one ocean metaphor, about learning to flow instead of freeze. Dr. Chen, who had been practicing family therapy for 20 years, recognized profound wisdom when she heard it. She began using the metaphor with other divorced couples she worked with. Some embraced it immediately, others needed time. But the image was powerful. Rivers splitting was natural, oceans dying was not. One particularly moving case involved the Ramirez family. Carlos and Maria Ramirez had been divorced for 5 years. Their 3 children, ages 12, 14 and 16, had essentially stopped communicating with their father because being around him meant dealing with their mother's barely contained rage. The family was fracturing in ways that felt permanent. When Dr. Chen shared the two rivers, one ocean story with Maria, the mother broke down crying. "I've been building dams," Maria said. "I've been so angry at Carlos for leaving us, for choosing his new wife over our family, that I've been stopping the river. I've been making the kids choose, and I've been telling myself it's for their protection. But it's not. It's revenge. I'm making the ocean die, because I want Carlos to hurt the way I hurt." Dr. Chen sat with that realization, let it breathe, then gently asked, "Are you willing to try flowing, even a little, even if it hurts?" Maria met with Carlos for the first time in 3 years, not through lawyers but face to face. She told him she couldn't forgive him yet, maybe never, but she could try to be water for their children. Could they attend their daughter's quinceañera together? Could they sit at the same table, not as reconciled spouses but as two rivers flowing toward the same ocean? Carlos, who'd been living with crushing guilt and the pain of losing connection with his children, agreed immediately. The quinceañera wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments, there was tension, but there was also a 14-year-old girl who got to dance with both her parents, who got to have family photos that included her whole family, who went to bed that night not having to comfort one parent about the absence of the other, who felt, maybe for the first time since the divorce, like she didn't have to choose, like she could be whole. The Ramirez children didn't magically heal overnight, but they started talking to their father again, started accepting that their parents' marriage was over, but their family could continue in a different form, started understanding, as Kevin Parker had learned, that you could run forward instead of constantly looking left and right. Two rivers could flow to the same ocean without merging back into one. Stories like this multiplied. A teacher in Portland heard the two rivers story from a colleague and shared it with her sister, going through a bitter custody battle. A family law attorney in Chicago started using the metaphor in mediation sessions. A children's book author wrote a picture book about rivers and oceans that became a bestseller among divorced parents, looking for ways to explain their family structure to young children. Bruce Lee never knew the full extent of what he'd started that day. He continued his career, his teaching, his films. He taught thousands of students about martial arts, about philosophy, about being water. But that 15-minute intervention at Lincoln Elementary School would touch more lives than he could have imagined, because he taught something that day that transcended martial arts. He taught radical compassion. He taught that even the most broken relationships could find flow for the sake of love. When Kevin Parker turned 16, he decided to write Bruce Lee a letter. He'd been thinking about that day for 6 years. About how one moment of intervention had changed the trajectory of his entire childhood. About how learning to run forward instead of looking left and right had shaped him into someone who didn't fear love or commitment. Someone who understood that families could break and heal in the same breath. Someone who knew that flowing was always better than freezing. He addressed the letter to Bruce Lee's family, not knowing if it would ever reach them but needing to try. He wrote about the sports day, about sitting alone in the middle, about the moment his parents sat beside him, about the race where he ran forward, about the 6 years since then, watching his parents learn to flow for him, about how that day had saved him from a childhood of divided loyalty and fractured love. "Dear Mr. Lee," Kevin wrote, You probably don't remember me. I was just one kid at one school sports day. But you changed my life. You taught my parents about 2 rivers and 1 ocean, and that metaphor has been the foundation of my family ever since. I'm 16 now. My parents are still divorced. They'll never get back together. But they're friends. They co-parent beautifully. They both came to my driver's license test last week and celebrated together when I passed. They both came to my birthday dinner and managed to laugh together, genuinely. Not because they're one river again, but because they both flow to the same ocean. Me, I'm the ocean, Kevin continued. I wanted you to know that what you did that day mattered. I know you're famous. I know you teach thousands of people. I know you've done and will do many important things. But for me, for my family, for all the families who've heard this story and learned from it, what you did that Saturday morning was the most important teaching in the world. You didn't just give a martial arts demonstration. You demonstrated compassion. You demonstrated that seeing someone's pain and choosing to help, even when it's inconvenient, even when you have other things scheduled, is what real mastery looks like. He signed the letter, with eternal gratitude, Kevin Parker. P.S. I'm learning martial arts now. Not just the physical part, the philosophy, the flow, being water. Because of you, I understand what that really means. It means letting love flow even when it's hard. It means choosing connection over rigidity. It means running forward instead of looking left and right. Thank you for teaching me that. Thank you for saving my childhood. The letter found its way to Bruce Lee's family after his death. They shared it with Linda Lee Cadwell, Bruce's widow, who was deeply moved. She'd known Bruce was planning to write a book about martial arts philosophy applied to daily life. This letter reminded her that Bruce had been living that philosophy every day, not just teaching it. That his legacy wasn't just in films or fighting techniques, but in moments like this. In choosing to help a broken family instead of starting a demonstration on time. In seeing a child's pain and refusing to look away. Linda Lee Cadwell shared Kevin's letter in an interview years later, and it sparked a new wave of interest in Bruce Lee's philosophy beyond martial arts. Parenting experts, family therapists, divorce mediators, they all started exploring how "be like water" could apply to modern family dynamics. Academic papers were written, TED Talks were given. The 2 rivers, 1 ocean metaphor became shorthand in family therapy circles for healthy co-parenting after divorce. But beyond the academics and the experts, the story continued to spread person to person, parent to parent, family to family. Because every divorced parent who heard it recognized something true, recognized their own pain, recognized their own child's pain, and recognized that they had a choice. They could build dams, freeze their rivers, punish their ex by withholding flow, or they could be water. They could flow to the ocean even when flowing meant being in proximity to someone who'd hurt them. Even when flowing meant letting go of righteous anger. Even when flowing meant putting their child's wholeness before their own brokenness. The Parker family, meanwhile, continued their journey. When Kevin graduated high school, both Linda and Tom were there, sitting together, cheering together, taking photos together, not as a reunited couple, but as 2 people who'd learned to flow for the ocean they'd created. When Kevin gave his valedictorian speech, he talked about resilience, about adaptation, about how families can break and heal simultaneously, about 2 rivers and 1 ocean. Linda cried watching her son speak. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pride mixed with memory. She thought about that Saturday morning 6 years ago, when Bruce Lee had asked if she saw Kevin or if she saw Tom. She'd been so blind, so consumed by hurt, that she'd been looking through her son instead of at him. Bruce Lee had given her back her sight. Had shown her that the most important question wasn't whether she could forgive Tom but whether she could love Kevin more than she hated Tom. The answer had been yes, would always be yes. Tom watched his son with similar emotions. He'd carried guilt for 6 years, would carry it probably forever. But he'd also carried Kevin. Had learned to show up, had learned that being a good father after divorce meant being uncomfortable, meant flowing into spaces where his ex-wife was, meant choosing Kevin's needs over his own comfort every time. Bruce Lee had given him a framework for that. Had shown him that redemption wasn't about erasing mistakes but about flowing despite them. After the ceremony, Kevin found his parents talking together, actually talking, about his college plans, about how they'd handle the logistics of moving him into the dorm, about family weekend and whether they'd both come. Watching them navigate these details together, with patience and even occasional humor, Kevin felt grateful, not for the divorce. The divorce had hurt, had broken something that could never be fully repaired, but grateful for what came after. For two parents who learned to flow, for two rivers that never merged back together, but never stopped giving water to their ocean. Years later, when Kevin had children of his own, he told them about the day they almost didn't have the family they had. About how their grandparents Linda and Tom had almost let pain and anger create a childhood of division and fractured loyalty. About how Bruce Lee, someone they'd never met, had saved Kevin's childhood by teaching two adults about rivers and oceans. Kevin's children grew up understanding that family wasn't about perfection, it was about flow. About choosing love over rigidity, about running forward together even when you couldn't run together. The lesson of that Saturday morning at Lincoln Elementary School, the lesson Bruce Lee taught without planning to, without knowing how far it would reach, became woven into the fabric of how families heal. It wasn't the only way. It wasn't always possible. Some divorces were too toxic. Some situations required distance for safety. But for families like the Parkers, for families where the marriage had ended but the capacity for love remained, the two rivers, one ocean framework offered hope, offered a path, offered permission to be broken and flowing simultaneously. And somewhere in the flow of water that connects all things, in the space where ancient wisdom meets modern pain, Bruce Lee's teaching continues. Continues in every divorced parent who chooses to sit beside their ex at a school play. Continues in every child who learns they don't have to split themselves in half. Continues in every family that discovers that breaking and healing can happen in the same breath. Two rivers, one ocean, forever flowing, forever teaching us that the greatest martial art is learning how to fight for love without fighting against each other. If you're in this situation right now, if you're the river that wants to build a dam, if you're the river that's frozen in hurt, if you're the ocean that's dying of thirst, remember this story. Remember Kevin Parker sitting alone in the middle. Remember Bruce Lee choosing compassion over convenience. Remember that flowing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean forgiving. It doesn't mean going back. It just means moving forward. For your children. For the ocean. Always for the ocean. Be water. Learn to flow, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Because your children are watching, learning, understanding what love means by how you choose to love them. Choose flow. Choose water. Choose the ocean over the dam. Every single time.